Let's move on to Bernie, shall we?
Yeah, so Bernie Sanders went back on with Joe Rogan. I sort of skimmed through the whole conversation, and there was a long stretch that was interesting, but kind of, went on for a long time about like AI and what do we do about this and how do people find meaning. So that was a lot of it. Also, Bernie just doing his normal Bernie thing, talking about healthcare and the millionaires, the billionaires was also a good part of it. But there were a couple pieces that I found pretty interesting. One of them where Bernie is talking about Congressman Massey and some of the attitude he's taken towards the Iran war in particular, and you get Joe's response to that. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
I mentioned there's a guy named I don't even know his first name, Mr. Massey. Is that name ring a bell?
Thomas Massey.
Thomas from Kentucky.
Yeah.
And this guy, as I am, is opposed to this war in Iran. Just yesterday, Trump gave a long post about how they're going to primary this guy. And what bothers me is you would hope that there would be respect enough for members of Congress that you can vote your own conscience. You could, represent your constituency. Every district is different in America. But right now, anybody stands up and say, well, I disagree with President Trump. Bam, you are finished. We're going to primary you. We got all kinds of money. You're out of there. That happened to Massey yesterday.
So I thought that was pretty interesting, that coming up, and Trump's attempt to punish Thomas Massey, which we were just talking about. And Thomas Massey's been speaking out a lot about AIPAC, and I think it's been really important.
He's also raised about $1.5 million in the last week, so Massey's crushing it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that his speaking out on AIPAC in particular, coming from a Republican who has a lot of credibility, he's an ideological libertarian, but he has a lot of credibility with a pretty significant swath of the Republican Party. And for him to be talking about the influence of this lobby and the way that it works, I think has been really significant, broken through to people like Joe Rogan and others where, the left, we're always talking about money in politics. Bernie's always talking about money in politics. It really does land a lot when you have someone from the right who is making that kind of a critique.
Yeah.
There was another moment here that I thought was interesting that I wanted to get your reaction to, Saagar, where Joe is talking about how he sees the divisions within MAGA right now, again, about war in Iran. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that part.
I think the whole MAGA thing right now is very divided, particularly because one of the things that they voted for was no war. Well, now it seems like we're in a war, right? So and it's quick. We're 6 months in, and that's already popped off. And then people are very concerned with now what happens to our troops overseas that are in these bases, that are in vulnerable positions, and what happens with, there's supposedly documented terror cells that got in through the open border over the last 4 years. So what happens now in America? What happens on American soil?
Sure. No, I agree with those.
When a guy like Thomas Massey steps up and says something like that, he's going to have a lot more support as well.
The answer is yes. And my only point is he has a right.
Yes.
Somebody else says, hey, I think the war is a great idea. Fine, that's your view. You got to go back. But what bothers me is that if anybody stands up, the next day, we're going to primary. You're out of here, man. And that's the Republicans. Let me talk about the Democrats for a moment, okay? And I don't even know your views on this, so you may disagree with me. Israel was attacked by Hamas, and Hamas is a terrible terrorist organization. They killed 1,200 people, which in a small country like Israel is a lot of people. Terrible, terrible attack. It's a war crime. Israel had a right, in my view, to defend itself. But the Netanyahu government did not have a right to kill 52,000 people in Gaza, wound well over 100,000. And right now, as we speak, Joe, children are starving to death because of Israel's blockades.
Yeah.
Starving to death. And I brought forth 2 resolutions, which basically were very simple, and they said no more U.S. military aid to Israel under these conditions. One vote got 15 votes in the Senate, and the other one got 16. Do you think that members of the Senate do not know what's going on in Gaza? The kids are starving to death. The innocent people are being shot down right and left. They know it. Why do you think I couldn't get more votes?
They wouldn't vote against Israel.
Right.
It's political suicide.
Now you're talking.
Right.
All right. So in the Republican side, you have moneyed interests saying you speak up against Trump, you're out of here. In the Democratic side, you speak up against the Netanyahu government, you're out of here as well. And they have been successful. You have super PACs like AIPAC spending a fortune You stand, and they have already knocked off a number of members of Congress, good members of Congress, and they will do it again. So all I'm saying is you got a corrupt campaign finance system on both sides.
So what
like
do you think
that.
of that exchange?
Well, that's
Yeah.
what makes Bernie good at this, right? Is that he's talking both about those sides, and he also gets Joe to kind of agree with him. I mean, you know, it's funny. This is where the analysis just always, and I understand why people do this, but the MAGA base is an actual thing. It's not just like something you talk about. I'm talking about people who love Donald Trump and say that he is more important to them than the Republican Party. That is not really the podcast audience really at all. Most of those people are boomers, rural, working class voters who mostly just like don't vote for anything else and they just love Trump. Now, outside of that is more what I would say is the Maha base, and this would probably be a more accurate way of talking about it, who are a lot more podcast aligned and who are a lot more libertarian. Those are the people, I put Dave Smith in that category, maybe Candace Owens, probably Joe himself, who are attracted to Trump for more of those elements, Tulsi Gabbard as well. That, if anybody's, quote, been betrayed, I would say it's that segment of that audience. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that that's a meaningful 50 or 60% or whatever of the Republican electorate, but it is a new part. And it's also, look, when you win the popular vote, you do so with a coalition. You have MAGA they're never going to go anywhere. That's not the point. MAGA's not ever going to go anywhere. The boomer Republicans are going to vote Republican no matter what. The way you win the popular vote are with some really interesting coalitional groups, Maha people, and also some of these more anti-war voters. You know, we were going to do a segment before the Iran war ended, whatever, at least paused, at least for now, about polling. But, you know, these anti-war Muslims in Dearborn, it was not nothing that put him over the edge. That's how you win X amount of electoral votes. And so I think we need to be more accurate in terms of the type of voter who is out there. Again, I would never claim that this is a huge percentage, but it can be your margin of victory. And I think we should start thinking about it in those terms.
To me, the way I've been talking about it is the MAGA base versus independents. You know, there were
Perfect.
independents who swung to Trump, and that's what gives him this victory and gives him the popular vote margin, et cetera. And I think they're the ones who are up for grabs. And, you know, independents overall, if you look at the polling, people who don't identify as Republicans, don't identify as Democrats, they are not happy about the strikes. You know, the numbers are significantly underwater. They're overwhelmingly underwater among Democrats. They are significantly underwater among independents. Among Republicans, they all basically support him. CBS did to your point about like parsing the MAGA base, CBS did a poll separating out all self-described Republicans from self-described MAGA Republicans. And among all Republicans, the strikes were supported 85-15, so still quite overwhelming. Among MAGA Republicans, actually, the support is even higher. 94% of the MAGA Republican base supported these strikes. So the accuracy in the language is something that's been bugging me too, because if you say the MAGA base is divided, like they're not.
Yeah, that's just
the MAGA base is 94% in favor of these airstrikes. They shifted. Before Trump did it, there was a little bit more dissent, a little bit more concern. Once he did it, they were all on board. And that is what we've seen. You know, there is not a core ideology here. The core commitment is to Donald Trump. And what he does, what he says, defines where MAGA is going to be. And that is just reality that we've seen time and time and time and time again. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has claimed he was going to go in one direction and then ultimately gone in the other direction. And we've seen the MAGA base every single time find a way to justify it because Trump did it, ergo it must ultimately be good.
That's right.
Probably the most heated exchange over the course of the interview came towards the end, when Bernie seeks to bring up some of Trump's authoritarian tactics. And Joe starts to get a little, you know, it gets a little more contentious here, where Bernie is specifically talking about some of the lawsuits and the attacks on free speech by Trump, some of the lawsuits that he has waged against various media companies. Let's go ahead and take a listen. This went on for a little while, but let's go ahead and take a listen to a section of this.
And what I worry about Trump is, you're right. You know, I read, it is astounding back in the 1780s when these guys wrote the Constitution, how perceptive they were.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, they said—
Their understanding of human desires and the power and all the corruption.
Exactly.
Pretty amazing.
And they wrote that having just fought a war and won a war against the most powerful despot on earth, the King of England, right?
Right.
And I think in the back of their minds were saying, all right, We just beat the King of England, absolute power. How do you create a new country which has checks and balance so that nobody ever has that power again? And I got to say, I mean, one of the things, and there was a lot of arguments about Trump, that worries me very, very much is this movement toward authoritarianism and going after media, suing media, taking away the authority that Congress has.
When you say suing media, are you talking about the CBS lawsuit?
Among other things. He has,
Right, but don't you think there's a real issue with what they did?
no. In this
You
sense,
don't think that there's a real issue
It may-
in
look-
editing conversations to give
Right.
someone an answer
Joe,
that's
I've been
different
on-
than what they really answered?
Joe, I've been on 8 zillion shows, right? In my life.
Okay.
Okay. Now, should I sue you if you ask me some stupid question that I don't like, right? Or that you do something? Do I have a right? Should I sue you?
Yeah, but that's not what he's getting. He's
Well, he
suing
has
them
sued.
for.
He has sued ABC.
Mm-hmm.
He has sued Meta. He is suing the Des Moines Register because of a poll that came out during the campaign that he didn't like. All right. He is suing CBS for this Kamala Harris interview. So do I think how many? I cannot tell you the number of stories done about me that were not good stories,
Right.
That were dishonest stories. That's what a free press is about. You don't like it, you got to live with it.
So, Bernie is sort of making the broader point about the authoritarian tactics, and Joe is. Joe's supposed to be a free speech guy, but then he's down with these lawsuits against
I think I get
CBS,
where
et cetera.
The reason I understand is he's probably deeply fed up with a lot of these. In fact, I find this with a lot of rich guys who are like relatively well known as they get pissed about the media, and I actually understand. But the point is that
we get pissed about the media too.
I hate them as well, right? Like I've literally had lies written about me multiple times, and it's like, well, that's part. I think it's more useful to explain the principle, and I haven't listened fully to the interviews. I don't know if Bernie gets to this, but the point of the way that the standard is set currently is that you have to be able to prove as a public figure their willful knowledge that they knew what they were saying was a lie at the time. And then you have to be able to show a damage. Now, the reason why it's set that way is from a New York Times versus Sullivan case at the Supreme Court back in the 1970s, because we actually used to live in a much more censorious press. And the way that current legal doctrine looks like is Britain. And in Britain, they actually have a much lower standard for the ability to sue over defamation and libel. And in my opinion, I don't think they have nearly an adversarial culture enough. You have much more of like the power veto of somebody coming in and saying, no, that's not going to happen. And the reason why I think that standard is important from a media person who works in this is it preserves the ability to report things that are off the cuff, on the fly, first draft of history. Of course, there are going to be errors. As long as you have an editorial process in place and you can also demonstrate that what you're trying to do is not willfully lie about somebody, then it should be an extremely high standard to make sure that you can disseminate that level of information.
Yeah.
And if that didn't exist, you genuinely would have just a lot less of people. Okay, let's give a great example. This Iran intelligence story, right? The Trump administration is saying that they're trying to libel these pilots. You can see that's bullshit. That's not what's happening.
Right.
They took facts and they reported it. They're not willfully trying to libel or defame the pilots. They're taking information and they're putting it out into the public. But people should know that prior to that Sullivan decision and really to the Pentagon Papers, that story would have seen the light of day. You and I would have no idea that was actually the case.
Well,
and I think we're better off for knowing.
Let's take that one step further, because this gets to the next point, which is that what happened with ABC News and with CBS is because they didn't want to get crosswise with the Trump administration. They didn't go forward and fight.
That's the thing.
those
They
suits.
could have taken it to trial, and they absolutely would have won.
They
I'm telling
decided,
you 100% they would
But
have
they
won.
decided they would rather effectively pay a bribe to
Exactly.
Trump so that their business deals could go through. And Bernie does get to this point. Their business deals can go through, and they're not going to get messed with, et cetera. And so even though, when they're out there saying, oh, the New York Times or whoever is libeling these pilots, even though that's obviously a bullshit and spurious claim, because of the track record of all of these media lawsuits and the fact that these corporate entities are very willing to bend the knee and capitulate and pay the bribe rather than have their business messed with, it does act as an effective check on the press, because they have that hanging over their head. We saw the way that 60 Minutes the fallout over there and their desire, the leadership's desire there for them not to go too far in terms of their Trump criticism so that their larger business entity wouldn't get crosswise with him. And so that's the point that Bernie is trying to make. And, on the specifics of like the CBS News, I think was the one where there was an edit of Kamala Harris that made Kamala look better. I mean, you can criticize as we did.
Yes.
But also news outlets edit interviews all the time.
Right. Not
all
us,
the
by the
time.
way. Not us, just so you have
Fox News, I'm not going to say we've never edited an interview.
I'm not sure it's ever
I don't know if we have, but theoretically you could imagine, that question we don't have time, whatever.
Fair
but
enough.
Fox News edited that interview with Trump.
Yes.
Where to make his Epstein answer look better. Like, should Kamala sue Fox News over distorting the election because they hid from the audience the fact that Trump gave a really poor answer on Jeffrey Epstein that actually raised a lot of questions? No, she should complain about it. Fine. But the idea you should sue them or any other news outlet that edits an interview a way that you don't find to be advantageous for you or you find to be advantageous for your opponent, that is ridiculous. I mean, it is completely absurd. But again, the broader piece here is part and parcel of this, series of authoritarian tactics that are used to force media organizations to trim their sails, to not critique as much, to be afraid of these lawsuits, to pay tribute to the king. Goes with the approach to universities, goes the approach to law firms, and, is sort of like part and parcel of this project. And that is really the important point to make here versus getting into the nitty gritty. I mean, the details, sure, they matter, but getting into the nitty gritty of the lawsuits isn't really the point. It's that bigger picture that is what really matters.
I don't disagree, but I also think that part of the problem, and this is actually, I think Trump is, what he does is he takes everything to the nth degree.
Yeah.
But the truth is that government has always used its leverage over these massive corporations to influence media. And what we can see, like, for example, let's take CBS. CBS is owned by Paramount, right? And Paramount is now being sold to Skydance. Well, Sherry Redstone, who was the head of Paramount, who is, by the way, a massive pro-Zionist Jew.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason she's interfering in CBS 60 Minutes, and also because she wants her merger to go through, which is like Paramount Studios in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And thus is trying to placate Trump over here. This, by the way, is, again, this is not just Trump. This is a tale as old as time. The Bush administration did this on Iraq coverage back in the mid-2000s. We've seen significant pressure in the past, for example. I read Jack Welch's book, or a book about Jack Welch, and he would never sell CNBC because he was like, you don't understand. CNBC cost me X amount of money, but its value to General Electric as a company because of the ability to manipulate the stock market and to influence all policy discussion is immense. Bloomberg, same thing. Bloomberg Terminal owns Bloomberg News. So really, I think it's also a story of like corporate consolidation and control over media. Because of course the government and presidents and that will use their leverage on those organizations. We've seen it threatened in the past. Nixon famously as well would threaten their businesses and their permits and all these other things that won't be able to go through. It's part of the reason why, with the internet and more independent models, you genuinely can get a little bit more freedom. But it's such a big story that it is important for people to understand that.
That's all accurate.
Yeah.
I've never seen a president sue a media company over a poll they didn't like.
No, but that's
I'm saying is
Trump is Trump just goes all out. Okay, I want to say full something else, but I'll save it. But that's what he does. But he's less subtle about it, I guess. I'm only just contextualizing it in that so that people should understand that remember when Bernie, what did he say on the campaign trail?
Oh, about Washington Post?
Yeah, and he was like, who's that owned by? He said, who's that owned by? Something like that. And everyone freaked out at him. But it's just so obvious now, the way that this all works and the way that they use their media companies as tools for their broader empire. Bezos yesterday rolled out a new policy where sources who disagree with the way a story was framed are able to email in their comments about a story. Why do you think he did that? Okay? All right, let's wonder a little bit about why these things work.
Here's what I would say is different, and then we can get to the Liver King story, which also directly involves Joe Rogan and also involves us potentially.
That's right.
What Trump has done differently with his administration, I did a long monologue about this previously, is there is no longer even the appearance or claim or pretense of neutrality. Everyone knows if you get crosswise with Trump, he will get the DOJ after you. He will pull your funding, and whether it's Department of Education, whether it's your federal, emergency, whatever it is not, there is no pretext of neutrality. It's Versailles. You're completely accurate about that. So previously, remember in the Obama administration, this big scandal that, allegedly there were tax statuses being revoked by the IRS in a political manner. This was a giant scandal, okay? This would go unremarked upon. I don't even know there'd be a news article about it. It's just—
What was that woman's name? It was like
Lois Lerner.
Lois, yeah.
It is so— that is what has truly been transformed about the government under Trump, is everyone expects that every single aspect, every agency head, every lever that they can use against you, they will. And so that means that, if Trump threatens to sue you, that carries a lot of power. If they're going out, if they're if university that they're going after, if it's a state they're going after, it contains even more power. Not that it hasn't always been, the federal government has always had a lot of power, but now there's not even a pretense of neutrality whatsoever. So they can go after you, and it's barely even a scandal that they're doing it in a politically motivated way. So that's what I think is, that's what the Rubicon Trump has truly crossed, and, a way in which he has truly changed the nature of the relationship that people expect from the federal government vis-a-vis the citizens and civil society, is what I would say.
I don't really disagree with any of that. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.